Now, it's important to understand that this is a complicated doctrine, and it's a complicated belief system. The first Muslims that I met in our investigation were not terrorists. They were anti-terrorists. They were patriotic, mostly Americans, but they were patriotic for America. And what they were doing was helping us infiltrate the terror cell, translating conversations for the FBI, helping the prosecutors whip the translations into a narrative that could be a compelling proof for a jury at trial. In short, what their objective was every day when they came to work was to convict jihadists and send them to jail. And they felt that the jihadists were perverting their religion, and that their understanding of Islam was much richer in terms of the traditions of Islam, not just the literal doctrine of it, but cultural factors around it, the evolution of Islamic jurisprudence, and the like. And what I learned from that is not only that there's very definitely two sides to the story, and it's crucial for purposes of our policy and our security that we figure out a way to divide our Islamic supremacist enemies who want to conquer the West from our Muslim allies who are on our side and are pro-Western, and we want to keep it that way. We certainly don't want to do anything that would be perceived as driving them into the enemy camp. But let me just say that I think one of the things that we've done terribly wrong in both foreign policy and counterterrorism for a whole generation now is try to define the true Islam. I always wondered, talking about common sense, whether it was Attorney General Reno or other high-level officials in the Justice Department or even President Clinton who were talking about my case, and they would talk about how these guys had perverted Islam and twisted it into something that it wasn't. I always wondered, why did Janet Reno think she knew more about Islam than the blind sheikh? I mean, clearly she didn't. They were speaking politically something that they aspirationally wished was true, but something that was clearly false. But to say that Islam was culpable in this doesn't tell the whole story, or even close to the whole story. And what I came away ultimately thinking was there may not be a true Islam. There's so many different ways of interpreting it. And there are so many places where cultural factors either cabin some of the more bellicose aspects of Islamic doctrine, or change them, or evolve them, that there's much more to a religious tradition than just literally what the doctrine says, even though you have places like Saudi Arabia where the literal Quran and Scripture, the literal Sharia, is deemed to be the law of the land. So I think we don't have either a way or an interest in defining the true Islam. For purposes of American national security, the doctrine that threatens us is Islamic supremacism. This is the imperative to implement Sharia, whether it's done by violence or nonviolence. That's what we have to focus on. Now, is Islamic supremacism the true Islam? Is it a false Islam? Who knows? And for our purposes, who cares? And I don't mean to be flip about that. What I mean to say is, for our purposes, what matters is that millions of Muslims believe it, whether it's true or not. And they're willing to act on it. And they're willing to act on it in a very aggressive way. And, look, we've fought in our history many times totalitarian ideologies, certainly throughout the 20th century. The fact that we thought that they were false promises or false ideologies didn't make them any less threatening. You have to fight them anyway. So I think that we need to spend a lot less time on the futile idea of trying to define the true Islam and then call everything else a false Islam, because it's caused a lot of really convoluted thinking in our national security. The important thing is we have enemies who believe this doctrine and are willing to act on it, and they act on it in a very lethal way. The other thing that we have to understand about this, I think, is that Islamic supremacism is representative of what is, if we look at Islam more broadly, a different civilization from the West. And I think one of the things that people in the Middle East are angry about, and occasionally with good reason, is the idea that we talk down to them. That they think that, that we're telling them, you know, look, we'll come over to your neck of the woods. We'll implant Western institutions. We'll implant Western ideas of liberty and equal rights and constitutional governance and free enterprise, or as free as it can be anymore. But we'll plant those ideas in your society, and you'll see how terrific it is. And your society will begin to flourish, and everything will be different and better. You see, the thing is, it's not that they don't get the West. I think very often we don't get them because we're not trying hard enough. But it's not that they don't understand the West. They do. They get it perfectly. They think their way is better. Now, I happen to think they're terribly wrong about that. But who cares what I think? They think their way is better. And they have their own way of judging. And they have their own principles that they live by. You know, look, one of the reasons I'm really glad that I grew up as a trial lawyer instead of a journalist is that it gets drummed into you at an early point that you have to try to understand how the other person thinks. You can't just, you know, this is my set of arguments and that's your set of arguments, and we don't even have to engage. You know, in trial lawyer work, we're in the convince the other guy's business, or in the convince the jury's business, and you have to try to understand how other people think. Well, here's how these other people think. They are raised to believe that Allah has given humankind the gift of Sharia, which is, in their, the way they teach it and the way they understand it, the greatest gift that could ever be given to show what a dignified human life is supposed to be and how it's supposed to be lived. And with Allah having given this gift, which doesn't recognize any division between spiritual life and political life, and therefore tells you how you are supposed to live all of it, they see it as a great affront, as grievous a sin as there could be, for somebody who has been informed of this to turn their nose up at it and reject it. Now, we come from a different culture. We come from a culture that divides spiritual life from political life. Even the most fervent believers, religious believers in the West, have an expectation grown up over time that there is a whole area of life, political life, civil life, where your religious principles don't get to dominate. You have to live, you have to be tolerant, you have to put up with the way other people want to live, and you have to come to some stable norm. We don't believe, if you think about how Sharia works and how our system works, we are from the very premise of our system in two different places. We believe that the people have a right to govern themselves, to chart their own course, to pursue their own destiny, irrespective of any prior existing legal code or religious code. We get to decide. In Islamic culture, they believe that Allah gifted them with Sharia, which tells them all the answers to everything. And that if anybody wants to chart a course that's contradictory of Sharia, that's a grievous sin. So, you know, we've been operating because we'd like to operate under a premise for about a decade or so. If you look at the constitutions the United States helped write in Afghanistan and Iraq, for example, we've been operating on this false premise that Western democracy and Sharia Islam are seamlessly compatible. And I'm here to tell you, it just ain't so. They are incompatible in very basic ways. That doesn't mean that cultures can't coexist and can't find a mean for coexisting. But it does mean that we have to stop kidding ourselves into thinking that there aren't any real differences between cultures and there aren't any real differences between civilizations. And we can all sit down and agree and it's all going to come out peachy. It's not. It's not the way it works. And even if we want it to be so, it's just like war. We don't want to be at war. We didn't want to be attacked. But we're there. Whether you want war or not, it may want you. And you have to react to it. So we're in a situation where we have people who are implacably hostile to us, who have accumulated a lot of power, and who we're going to have to deal with. And there's a limit to how much we're going to be able to reason with them. And there's a limit to how much we're going to be able to, find some entente cordiale that we'll all be able to coexist. It's not going to happen. So I think we have to stop worrying about defining our enemies and defining what Islam is and trying to use Islam as something that discredits our enemies. Because guess what? Our enemies don't care what we think about Islam.